Welcome in the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for finding us on your favorite podcast app. We're everywhere, not just iTunes, also Podbean, which is both platforms, whether it's Apple or Android, also the same for Spotify. Also, you can check out every night, 7 to 8 p.m. We're on Dash Radio. Download the Dash Radio app. Search for Nothing But Net. Again, you'll find us there every day at 7 p.m. And I'll be back on Onside Radio on Monday at 10 a.m. for my 2-hour show on all things South Florida sports. Also, check out the latest from Brady Hawk. He has actually 2 new pieces up there today on 5reasonsports.com. We do not have a paywall there. It's got a piece about Kendrick Nunn's performance against the Lakers, something we're going to talk about a little bit here, and also about Bam Adebayo's defense on LeBron James and how Bam held him to 2 of 8 shooting and an overall 7 of 21 performance for LeBron. Also, check out the great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, including our friends over at bestever.com. Now, again, it's BST EVR.com, BSTEVR.com. We're going to be running some simulations on there. You can check them out on our YouTube channel. This is our sports simulation site that we've partnered with. They do NFL now, but they're going to be adding NBA. So sign up now. It's free. Again, it's BSTEVR.com. You want to see how the Dolphins would have done with Herbert this season as opposed to Tua. You can do that. You want to play the current Tampa team against a previous Tom Brady team from way back. You want to swap out players. You can do just about anything. And not only can you simulate, and they'll tell you who would have won what percentage of the time, they'll also print out an entire game story for you. They actually write one out. It's kind of amazing. I'm not sure how they do it. And then they have a box score. So in other words, if you have any kind of argument with a friend about the NFL, you can settle it on BSTEVR.com. That's for Best Ever Sports. And again, get on now because we're going to start doing some of this stuff once they add NBA a little bit later in the spring. And now, tonight's episode.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5
on the floor.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a daily show on the Miami Heat and the NBA featuring Ethan Skolnick with Alex Toledo and Greg Sylvander, part of the 5 Reasons Sports Network.
All right, Ethan Skolnick back on 5 on the Floor. Got the full crew tonight. Here's today's floor plan. We got Alex Toledo. You can find him at Tropical Blanket. We've got Greg Sylvander. You can follow him at Greg Sylvander. We're in between birthdays right now. Greg, Saturday, right?
Yes, Saturday, 39. So now Dwayne and I are aligned. Father Time is undefeated. Yes.
That's pretty good. Alex, not 39. When is it, tomorrow?
Yeah, it's tomorrow, but also celebrated last night. They threw me a surprise party, and I missed most of the game live.
Yeah, both of you missed the game. So one of you was washed and one of you was distracted, basically, right? I mean,
yeah, and we know which one is the washed one. It's the 39-year-old.
Yeah, well, the 48-year-old stayed up for the entire game, but that's all right. Check out the post game from last night. I did it with Jonathan Ramlakan. Also, check out our 5 Reasons Skyforce crew. We got a new crew under Royal Shepherd and Adam Barai. I don't know what they're doing. They're building a little fiefdom over on the YouTube channel. So make sure to check out that whole group. Again, you can find them on the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. All right, let's get to it today, though. I want to talk about the win and what it signifies, but not to be overly negative here. But the one problem last night has been a consistent problem, and I didn't realize how bad a problem until I looked up the stats today, which is that basically the Miami Heat are the worst clutch offense in the entire NBA right now. And that almost bit them again last night when they went through a lengthy scoring drought. They had to rely on their defense. And to a certain degree, they had to rely on the Lakers to miss open shots because Kuzma had an open shot late. Gasol had an open shot late. LeBron passed up a shot late. The Lakers had good looks. They didn't make them. So I don't want to take away credit from the Heat. Again, ESPN gave them no credit. They said that they beat the depleted Lakers on ESPN.com, not mentioning that Hero missed the second half. He's questionable for the next game against OKC, or that Dragic was out. But, of course, Anthony Davis and Dennis Schroeder are out, so that's all the Lakers network, ESPN, cared about. I don't want to take too much away from the Heat. But let's start here. First thing, for both of you guys, what is the significance of beating the Lakers on the road to get to 3-3 on this trip? And where can they go from here? And then we'll get into the clutch problem.
Well, it's a big win. I mean, we went into this trip saying if you came home 4-3, you were thrilled. And if you were 3-4, you felt good about it. And as long as you didn't fall back in the standings any further, that it was a successful trip. And it looks like they're probably going to end up falling in line with that projection that we kind of talked about before this trip. So it's been successful. And to just get that game, on national TV, and obviously you see, a lot of guys playing well. It's significant, but ultimately the stuff that plagues this team, the offensive challenges are still there. And there's, we're going to talk about how they can maybe solve some of the clutch stuff, but I think that it even transcends some of that. They're just not a great offensive team yet. And they have to figure out a way to fix it. And I don't know that it's on the roster.
Alex, how do you look at a trip that is now 3-3? I think as a baseline, a bunch of us said 3-4 or 4-3. As long as you get to that, you go back home for a series of games, you'd be in decent position. We saw Boston lost today. They blew a 24-point lead to the Pelicans. The Heat are only 2 games behind them now for the 5 spot. They're 2.5 behind the Pacers. I mean, they're right there behind the Raptors. I mean, they're just not that far out. They could get to 4-3 with a very winnable game against an OKC team that actually I think is playing Cleveland beforehand. But then again, the Clippers game should have been had because they weren't playing anybody. And the Warriors game should have been had because they were up 15. I mean, how would you evaluate this trip if they finish it at 4-3 with a win against OKC?
Solid, right? And I think that's kind of what, like you said, we all kind of came into this trip thinking, 4-3 would be a realistic sort of slightly positive for this team, just, headed in the right direction, digging themselves out of the hole that they put themselves in. And obviously partly because of the injuries and the COVID contact tracing and everything that happened, all the context. Despite that, those 2 losses just really tainted the whole trip for me. They really did. And I know they're just 2 games, and it was really tough because it was 2 games back to back, and they were probably the 2 worst losses of the season. Maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe I'm not. I thought they were the 2 worst losses of the season. I thought like the fact that it happened back to back, the Clippers without their 4 starters and 2 of them being superstars, the Warriors missing their front court with Wiseman and Draymond Green, and, just giving up leads and just kind of playing soft and complacent on both ends of the floor really tainted it, just because it made it so much harder to appreciate, the fact that they have been trending back in the right direction. It's just being able to close out games and stay consistent on a game-to-game basis has still remained their problem. And like Leif said, the problems they have, although they've been trending in the right direction slightly, they're still there. The offense, to me, is still the most confounding thing about all of this. And obviously, Goran has to do a lot with that, him not being there and providing them a spark when Jimmy isn't on the court. But there's more than that. Like, I think we've talked about it on other pods. But if your offense is just constantly in the bottom 10 of the league, I know I don't know if we're halfway through the season yet, but it's kind of been there for most of the season. And that was their most reliable part of their arsenal last year. Something's got to be done. And I don't feel particularly great about their defense, even though that's been trending better as well. I just think like this trip didn't do anything to make me feel better about their problems. I'm glad that they'll most likely end up 4-3. And I don't want to count the chickens before they hatch because they play down to teams just like they play up to teams. But OKC should be a guaranteed win. They really are devoid of talent outside of like 2 guys. Mm-hmm. And even if they do finish 4-3, I don't think this is just something that you can leave as is.
Well, I think the only positives to take away, other than obviously getting the win against the Lakers, which we'll get into a little bit more depth, is that so many other teams in the East look flawed. The Celtics, to me, look more flawed than the Heat because they have a problem where one of their most important players looks shot right now, which is Kemba Walker. He was 1 of 11 from 3. I know he had a decent game the other night. He took a bad shot at the end, and he just looks like a liability. I don't think you could say that the Heat's best players look like liabilities. Dragic was not playing at the same level maybe as he was in the playoffs last year, but he wasn't that far off from it. And Jimmy and Bam obviously are playing still at a high level. Bam had one of the best defensive games I've seen him play, and that's saying a lot. And then Jimmy, obviously, you can nitpick with some stuff here and there, the mid-range stuff, some of the passing out, what he shouldn't pass out. But, 3 straight triple-doubles, and he pretty much played LeBron to a draw or better, which you're going to take every single time. But we're going to talk about Kendrick Nunn later in the episode because I want to save a little bit of time for him and kind of where you go from here with him because 27 points. He has been pretty much the Heat's most consistent perimeter scorer for a little while. But let's get into the clutch stuff because, the Heat have been traditionally a pretty good clutch team. Whatever the criticisms are of Eric Spoelstra and some of, putting the ball in Dwayne's hands, maybe when he was past his prime, et cetera. Last year they won all the overtime games. They made plays down the stretch of games to finish. So I decided to look at the numbers today after they had another drought against the Lakers. They are right now 30th in the league, that's last, in field goal percentage in clutch situations, which are defined by a margin of 5 or less, one way or the other, in the final 5 minutes. They've been in 17 of those situations this year. They're shooting sub 36%, not from three overall, and they're shooting 23% from three. Just as comparison, the Utah Jazz, best in the league, are shooting 54% in their clutch situations, which is one of the reasons why they have the league's best record. On its surface, Greg, is this simply a continuity issue, or do they need to go get somebody from the outside?
So there's a couple things here. There's you have to acknowledge that the fact that they've had to play so many different lineups, just like you said, continuity, and you mentioned the Utah Jazz, like they're one of the teams that have been impacted the least from whether it be COVID or just injuries in general and lineup changes. And when you have the kind of lineup issues that Miami has had, I think that that's going to lend itself to some of this, but not all. I also think that last year, you maybe had the luxury of when Jimmy and Bam got aggressive, you had defenders sagging off of the shooters a little bit more. And now they're maybe a half a second faster to get back. And it's forcing Jimmy and Bam to be far more decisive. And I think that they maybe they didn't anticipate how decisive and aggressive they were going to actually have to be to make this offense work as presently constituted. But like, this is the other thing. They need the Kendrick Nunn we saw against LA. They need a player like that every single night. So like, whether that's going to be Kendrick Nunn or it's Goran Dragic comes back and he's bubble Goran for the rest of the run, which, I mean, that would be a fun story in itself, or they go get it from the outside. The point is that they need another guy other than Jimmy and Bam, because it's the only way that this thing ever even, starts to look like it's going to work.
Well, Alex, last year that guy was Tyler Hero in a lot of situations. I mean, he led the team in fourth quarter minutes. He couldn't be on the court in this game because of the hip situation, and may keep him out against OKC also. But if Hero is the third option there with Bam and Jimmy, which means in some cases he's the first option if the two of them really don't want to look at the rim, is that enough? And should they have been better in these situations this year so far?
They should absolutely be better. There's no doubt about it. And I agree with everything Leif said, right? Those points he made about the lineup changes, like that is absolutely not insignificant at all. Like you can't develop continuity if if the lineups are constantly changing. You don't know who's closing, who's not. And I know that the depth was always supposed to be a strength. We didn't know who the closing five were going to be, but it was kind of a mess. Now, despite that, again, they need to be a lot better. Like there should be a team who should be built on punishing mismatches. And I just don't see them do that enough. I think they get really complacent, like we talked about with Jimmy and Bam, kind of, passing out of layups and stuff like that. And I think ideally they want to run the system and they want to kind of not cruise through games, because I don't want to make it sound like they're not trying, because that's not the case. What they want to do is just kind of, make everybody else around them better, and then just kind of hold off until the end of the game when they really have to take. But honestly, like it shouldn't be that simple. Like I think it really should be just about reading the game and what comes to you at that time. And like Leif said, it's forced them to be more decisive and more aggressive. And I think we kind of need Jimmy and Bam, as we've all have said, and, all of Heat Twitter and all of us, we need Jimmy and Bam to be more aggressive as a result, because they're trying to shut down the rest of the offense, because the whole NBA knows that they're trying to get to the three. They're trying to get their shooters good looks, because they've got some really good ones. And Kendrick Nunn looks, again, really good in the starting lineup, because that's the one thing he can really do is shoot. And look, if that stuff is getting shut down, it really is that simple. It comes down to Jimmy and Bam forcing and finding mismatches and punishing them. And that should be something that they should be able to do. Jimmy's really good at it. He did it all throughout the playoffs, especially against the Lakers. KCP and Danny Green, I'm sure, still waking up having nightmares about Jimmy Butler getting them forced on a switch to guard him, because he was just eating them up. And, that's a guy with pretty much being guarded by people taller than him. Like Jimmy is that strong and that good at for punishing mismatches. Bam isn't there yet. And then because the thing is, Duncan never gets these crevices anymore where he could shoot. So it's like these guys are all covered up. Jimmy and Bam, they need to force a switch somehow and get the matchup that they want. I think that's what it's going to come down to is mismatch hunting. The more that I watch this team.
Okay, so there's been a lot of talk about the defense, right? And statistically, the defense is still good. I mean, it's been better this year than last year. For all our talk about, not putting 3 bad defenders on the floor, which I think is all accurate and valid, that has not been the biggest problem. The problem has been the offense. And again, it's been the crunch time offense. I think a lot of what's happened at the end of games is they just can't score. They go on these droughts for a long period of time. And so we focus on the defense because the Heat are going possession after possession after possession without scoring. And eventually the other team takes the lead because they simply get so many opportunities to do so. The Lakers didn't last night, but probably should have, but they just missed a lot of those open looks. So I ask you, Greg, and then Alex, you jump in here. What is the 5? I mean, obviously Bam and Jimmy are going to be part of it. Is Hero, in your view, still one of those that should be on the floor always at the end? Is maybe Kendrick Nunn at this point? Because it seems like at least he'll be able to get to a mid-range game at times when they need it. Who, if you were to say this is the best offensive group we could put on the floor to fix this crunch time thing, because this is enough of a sample size that they're not good at it this year, what would be the 5, Greg?
I mean, so if you mean for the game tomorrow or today,
I'm
if
just
you're
saying generally, because typically Spoelstra likes to get to a closing 5 with
and then
with
and
maybe one
identify
offense defense switch, So we thought maybe it would be Robinson and Iguodala. Okay, that would be the offense defense thing when he can get, at a stoppage or something like that. But what is the offense that would be better than worst in the league? Shooting percentage.
It's tough to identify, but I mean, I would say that Tyler Hero, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, I have a feeling that he's going to go with Andre Iguodala as long as he's on the roster. And then that last player is really matchup dependent, depending on what they need. I mean, you could make a case for Kendrick once Goran is back. I mean, obviously shooting. And then it depends on opponent and if teams are sizing up or sizing down. And if you have the opportunity to go really small, which I think in some of these playoff series, we're going to end up seeing that more than ever. I have a feeling that teams are going to, as much as teams invested in bigs, I think that there's going to be opportunities for in series in the playoffs, particularly for teams to size down a little bit. So I just know those 4. So I gave you Bam, Jimmy, Tyler, and Iggy. And I guess, I mean, if you're making me choose one more, I'll go Goran today, but it could be Kendrick. It's tough, but that doesn't really even necessarily solve it. It's just the best 5 they have now.
I mean, for you, is it Dragic or is it Kendrick there or is it somebody else? Alex?
Honestly, there's no right answer right now. I think Dragic should be the right answer. We don't know what he looks like. And again, I just don't know how we can expect him to play up to the level that he did during the bubble after so many months off when, on the contrary, this year they had a really short turnaround. He's had the leg injuries. It just seems like Goran should be the right answer. I would probably still like him to be that guy, but I'm just not sure. I really do think, as we talked about before for the past year, it just kind of comes down to 2 things: the matchups and who's playing well that night. And so on a night like last night, you obviously leave Kendrick Nunn in. I think he was just playing so well. He's hitting all these shots, and Jimmy and Bam are going to always try to create open looks like I talked about before. And Nunn is one of those guys who could hit those shots. He was really feeling it yesterday. You leave him in. But there's no easy answer. I just think everybody has their own flaws and pros, and they're all kind of similar level players. Goran and Duncan obviously bring 2 completely different aspects of the game to the table. So in that part, I guess it's kind of a luxury. But then at the same time, we can't really fool ourselves into thinking, well, they got all these options, because I don't know that I buy. I really like Kelly. I really like him playing next to Bam in general. But when we're talking about the playoffs and going against the best teams in the world, I don't think Kelly is the long-term or even the short-term guy that you close with. I just think
Greg, you didn't even mention Duncan though, right? I mean, Alex threw Duncan in there. I mean, if we're not mentioning Duncan here, then how are we even talking about a long-term contract for him?
Yeah, no, that's where it gets so difficult because I don't see how you can not have Tyler, Goran, Bam, and Jimmy on the floor. I feel like those 4. And then, so it's just tough to find minutes for Duncan, but to your point, how do you invest in him and how does that shake out? I think maybe the percentage of the cap comes down for guys like Goran, in future seasons, but, but you're right. Like, how do you invest in him there? I think Spo trusts Iguodala, so that's a big one. And this may just also come down to that this is going to be a season where Jimmy and Bam are going to have to just take on that role more than ever, and they're going to have to look for additional options, go forward.
All right, we're going to talk about the additional options after the break. I want to get to that, and then I want to get a little bit more into Kendrick's game. Before we do, though, I want to tell you about another great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. And, of course, that's prizepicks.com. Use the code 5, F-I-V-E, and bet just about anything. You're betting on single players here in just about every sport. They just, if you're a tennis fan, the Australian Open, you could have bet on all of that. You also can choose, everything from highlight to soccer, but of course we push the NBA here. They've got the single stat categories now too. This is daily fantasy. So you're basically projecting over or under. They'll give you the fantasy score, or again, they'll give you a single stat projection, whether it's say 23.5 points for Jimmy Butler. If you went over the 15.5 for Kendrick Nunn against the Lakers, then you won on that. And then you can pair players from different sports together, from different teams. You can play power play, which means you're all in, and you're going for all the money there. Or you can go and play a flex play and you get some of your money back because you hedge a little bit. So use the code 5. Again, it's prizepicks.com. We've got a ton of people in the network that are now playing. I know Greg's been posting his picks pretty much every night. How'd you do last night, Greg? You do all right?
No, not great. I'd rather not talk about it.
All right, we'll skip over that one. But I'm going to start going on a run tomorrow. And of course, when the NFL comes back in the fall, you can play NFL again as well. They got college basketball too. So go to prizepicks.com, use the code 5. Make sure you use it. F-I-V-E helps us out, but also you will get a bonus for free. All right, let's get to the next part of this. If we're relying right now on Jimmy and Bam to be more aggressive, and we've seen that at times each will be more so Jimmy maybe than Bam, a lot of times getting to the line is a factor. That's not really factored as much into what I talked about with the clutch scoring in terms of shooting percentage. But overall, they haven't gotten to the line down the stretch of games as much as they did in previous years either, or at least last year. If basically we're not counting on Jimmy and Bam to sort of take over. It's just not their nature to always do that. Although, like I said, Jimmy's done it more than Bam. If you don't necessarily know if Hero can be that guy every night, if we're sort of arguing whether Dragic is going to be healthy enough, or you can use Duncan on defense so that you can actually keep him on the floor on offense, or whether Iguodala is going to hit an open 3 or going to be respected for an open 3, then it does raise the question whether they need to go outside the organization and do something. We've talked about trades. Of the types of players we've talked about, we had Nikias on. We gave him 3 different options, Greg. We said, would you rather for this team have a 3-level scorer, have a 4 next to Bam, or another power player next to Bam, or a point guard? And he said the thing he would want the most is the 3-level scorer. For a clutch offense, which of those 3 things would be most important? What do they need the most?
I mean, I think it's still probably comes back to the 3-level score, because it would help for Jimmy and Bam to not be relied upon so much. And I just can't help but go back to the light bulb that went off when Nikias said, you kind of need a 3-level score that's a big time dynamic offensive player, but he doesn't necessarily need to be the alpha. And gosh, that sounded like Zach LaVine. But you know what? Like, it also sounds like Tyler Hero to some degree, but it's just a question of whether he can get to the level that they need him to get to in big. I mean, I think in big moments we've seen it, but it's consistent enough so that they can rely upon it. And is he ready to step up and take on that role? Because statistically, when you look at it, it looks like he is ready, but in those moments, it's kind of it's yet to be seen. So I mean, if you're looking outside the organization, I think this is probably the thing that would cost the most. So it's going to be the biggest type of trade, and I just don't know that unless it's a really big, Zach LaVine level type deal, I don't see a player out there that makes a ton of sense that they could acquire that would fill the need that way from a 3-level scoring perspective.
Alex, do you agree? Because I want to go back and forth with you on this. Do you agree it's a 3-level score, and do you see a 3-level score that they could acquire without the sort of giving up the farm before the deadline?
And that's the really tough part, right? And I do agree, by the way. I listened to that pod and I agreed with Nikias. I would rank it And especially, whether it's crunch time offense or not, my priorities would be a 3-level scorer first, a 4 next to Bam second, and a point guard or natural point guard third. But to me, I lean towards needing those first two together. Like I don't want to pick from one of those. I would like a 3-level scorer and a 4. I know it's probably not realistic, but I agree with Leif that unless it's for somebody of the level of Zach LaVine, and I think we haven't really talked about him as much as Oladipo, and they're obviously different players, right? Like Oladipo isn't as much of a 3-level scorer. He's got a little bit of it, but he's a much better defender than LaVine is. Whereas LaVine is more of just an offensive dynamo. He's gotten better at playmaking, like Nikias alluded to. He's not as bad on defense, so it just feels like he's just further along in the process than the Tyler Hero, obviously, because he's been in the league a lot longer. And it's a good question that Leif poses, right? Like I think on the roster, you look at the guys who should be able to fill this role and who have in the past, and it's Goran and Tyler. Goran absolutely filled that role last year during the bubble. Again, I don't think he could play up to that same level where he was literally playing the best basketball in his Heat tenure, I think. But you saw what Goran was and how much it helped the rest of the team, Jimmy, Bam, and Duncan, and everybody else, to just kind of focus on what they're supposed to do when Goran is giving you a little bit of everything. Somebody who, when he has the ball in his hands, teams can't go under. If he runs a screen, like he can get to the basket, he can make passes. And to me, like, I still would like to rely on Goran in the playoffs. I just don't think you can play him that many minutes a game. So if you can get LaVine without giving up too much, I think that'll be nice. Again, Oladipo, I think would be nice. I don't know what's going on there, but like, I don't know if those guys are available. So I wouldn't just try to trade for somebody to put him into that slot. I would want somebody who's proven if you're going to be giving up assets for it. And to me, like the 4 thing is a necessity at this point, regardless. Even if I am putting a number 2, I think they absolutely have to make some type of move there. Not only for offense, but also for defense.
So the 4 thing, let's say they can't get a 3-level scorer, right?
Probably won't.
Let's say they can't get a point. Let's say they can't get a point guard who makes sense. Okay. If they were to add a 4, let's say that they add a Rudy Gay, a Thad Young, maybe even a PJ Tucker, who I guess now there's a report that Houston wants a player instead of a pick. If they add one of those type of players at the 4, who sort of fills the Jay Crowder role to a certain degree, how much does that help the crunch time offense, the clutch offense, to have that player out there, I guess, ostensibly most of the time instead of Andre?
It depends on which one you go to. PJ Tucker would not be more helpful, I don't think, at all. I think that Rudy Gay, of the guys you just mentioned, would be the player that probably could slot in and provide them some stuff during clutch moments, in crunch time, that, just offensively speaking, from that list, if you're talking about a player that they could slot in at the 4. So that may be a viable option. But it's slim pickings there, but I agree with Alex. It's like 1A and 1B in terms of in clutch situations, because the 3-level score is a bigger conversation. But when you talk about the clutch offense, if you really had an upgrade at the 4, I just feel like it would open things up in ways that that maybe none of this other stuff, including a point guard, would really do the same.
Rudy Gay, just to take Rudy Gay as an example, Alex, you insert Rudy Gay instead of Andre Iguodala. How much of a difference does it make?
I think it makes a difference for sure, because like Leif said, like he's just, he's more reliable on the offensive end of the floor. And I know you've been tweeting about it too. Like he's still, for the role that he plays, he's still a pretty productive player as a fringe rotation player. I think he's a starter level player, not that he has to be a starter. He would absolutely start on this team though, I think. But outside of Rudy Gay, obviously these guys, the 3 you mentioned, are different players, but I just think, just to boil it down to make it easier for this podcast, I think Rudy is the best offensive player of the 3. I think PJ is the best defensive player, and I think Thad Young is kind of in the middle, where I think he's good on both ends of the floor. And I just think whichever one of those 3 you bring in, let's say, from those 3, I think it helps, period, on both ends of the floor, because they're all two-way players, right? And I think that's really important, because you don't have to worry about playing a Kelly or playing an Andre, or just playing too many like bad defensive players who can get picked on. And I know that, we mentioned that before, they've held up as a defensive team. I still don't buy it. And I know, like, they're number 8 right now in defensive rating. The Spo has done a great job with that, especially with all the people out. But I just think I don't want to be worrying about choosing between offensive or defensive guys only in the playoffs. I want somebody there I could trust on both ends of the floor.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we preface all this trade talk for whatever player that could potentially provide a solution, provided that it's a fringe transaction. Like, think about Kendrick Nunn, right? If you look at his stats right now, you would say, like a casual fan who doesn't watch the Heat every day would say, gosh, he's a really valuable player. He's a starter level player. Look how much he scores. He plays really well. We've seen the ups and downs of his career, and he's had those moments where he's unplayable. Just always remember that all these guys that are getting shuffled around the league, they have similar stretches every season where they're unplayable or they don't measure up. So I just think it's important to recognize that it's not just Heat guys that go through that, and any of these guys have their own warts offensively or defensively.
Well, it's a good point to make is, we're not going to devote a lot of time to this on this episode, but if we talk more about DeMarcus Cousins this week, that's one of those debates because he's a name. He's had enough moments this year that have looked positive. But if you talk to the people who really have watched him, studied the tape on him, like Nikias wants nothing to do with DeMarcus Cousins, right?
So him and Blake are washed. I'm just gonna say it. Like I would take him over Chris Silva, I guess, if you're gonna drop him. That's my quick take. I think they're both washed. Try them out. Why not? But I wouldn't depend on either of those guys to be good players.
Well, most of the guys, most of the players,
just matter a lot.
Most of the players that the Heat have taken flyers on over the years have not worked out. We talked about the ones who have, but they took a flyer on Greg Oden. It didn't work out. They took a flyer on Eddie Curry. It didn't work out. Ronnie Turioff, I guess, briefly did for his role, but like Zydrunas Ilgauskas was toward. I mean, there are guys that are names. They've made all-star teams or they've gotten close to making all-star teams. And so, or they were top, 10 picks like an Oden or a Curry. And sometimes they just don't turn out they just don't have anything left. Okay. Or they just don't fit. But we like to talk about them because they're big names. I don't want to do a lot of Cousins here because I feel like we're going to be doing more of it as the week goes on, but your point is taken, Greg. It's not, everybody sounds better on paper. When you watch, teams play on a consistent basis, you have a different feeling about them. And I think that's the case here. We're going to do a brief segment here on Kendrick Nunn. I definitely want to get to him before the end of it. Before we do though, everybody knows that Manscaped has the perfect package 3.0 for all your below-the-waist grooming needs, but they didn't stop there. Complete your grooming game with a new refined cologne signature scent by Manscaped. It's the same signature scent that's in all Manscaped formulas. The cologne's a perfect complement to the collection. Light, approachable, and gentlemanly in all the right ways. Think of it as your wingman for the night to keep you fresh and ready for anything. This beautifully designed glass bottle makes a statement, and the manly scent is attractive to set the mood. So get 20% off and free shipping with the code 5RSN. Believe it or not, we've sold more of these things than anything else that we've attached ourselves to in the network. So for sure, make sure you check it out. There's some in the network who are still waiting for me to send the boxes. I promise I will this week. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code 5RSN at manscaped.com. All right, let's finish this thing up with Kendrick Nunn. 27 points last night. I put up a poll after the game. You can call this recency bias or not. I said, which of these two, if you had to choose one, who's the keeper? Right now, that poll after 2,000 votes is still 50-50. Kendrick Nunn and Duncan Robinson.
Wow.
So we've gone from amazing, right? We've gone from Duncan is virtually untouchable in the minds of some Heat fans. Definitely worth paying 18 to 20 million. He's shooting 39% from three on high volume, same volume as last season. Down a little bit, but still close to 40% from three, has improved a little bit defensively, makes a few more plays with the ball in his hands. And yet Kendrick Nunn, a guy who pretty much everybody left for dead 2 months ago, has put himself in a position or said, either we're not going to play him or we're going to trade him, has put himself in a position where basically he's neck and neck with Duncan. Is there any scenario, Greg, where you feel that that's the way the organization feels?
No, Duncan Robinson is the priority over Kendrick Nunn, and whether that's for better or worse. And I am aligned with that. I think that it's super recency bias and getting hyped up. No disrespect, Kendrick Nunn has been great. February has been a kind month for him. He's bounced back in a big way, but still what Duncan Robinson brings from a shooting perspective, I think that you have to think about what Duncan does as a vehicle to unlock other players on the roster. And I just don't know that Kendrick Nunn does that. And if Kendrick, what you're going to for Kendrick Nunn is buckets. And what you're hoping for is that in the next 12 months, the Heat get another guy on this roster aside from Jimmy and Bam that gets buckets better than Kendrick Nunn does. So in that case, Duncan Robinson just kind of fits the roster better. So I'm not going to get caught up in the short-term stuff right now. I'm sticking with the Duncan Robinson being more valuable. But one direction that I don't want to trend, and I feel like it's bubbling below the surface, so I'll address it now. And that's this notion that the Heat will operate above the cap and just retain all these guys on long-term deals. And if that happens, I'm stating it now on February 21st, the timeline is going to burn down on Twitter.
Oh, for sure. No doubt. But Alex, I mean, can you play devil's advocate here at all? Because I think the general consensus is Duncan, but that Duncan.
That's a fair question. I don't know if I can.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, what Duncan provides, which is, again, that type of gravity. Kendrick Nunn doesn't create that type of gravity, but also maybe I'll play the devil's advocate position here.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like it's kind of bubbling within you.
Well, here's the thing. Kendrick Nunn can get baskets when things break down. Okay. That's not something you're getting from Duncan Robinson. Okay. I mean, Duncan is fighting for space. They're blowing up the DHOs, all the things we've talked about this season, but he's not going to create anything. Kendrick Nunn, in the same way that Dragic can create for you. He can get to that mid-range game when that's available. That's not something that Duncan's really added to his game to this stage. And I don't know if that's going to be added on a consistent basis. And he can have one of those runs for you where, again, when everything else is stagnant, if Kendrick Nunn is feeling it, I mean, all of a sudden he's got, 15 in the first half on very good efficiency. And the reality is we can talk about, you watch him every day or not watch him. Shooting 49% for a guard in this league, who's also huge. Shooting a high volume of threes.
No doubt.
I mean, his effective field goal percentage is over 57 right now. I mean, literally, he has the same effective field goal percentage as James Harden. I'm not, for all the Harden fans, I'm not saying he's James Harden, but I'm just saying, like, he's got a top 30 effective field goal percentage among guards in the NBA. I feel like sometimes we just don't give him enough credit.
It's two things. It's one, we have to see further consistency. I think the falling off of the cliff in the bubble and how magnified it was in the playoffs when there were games where he just wasn't really part of the mix. I think that all is still fresh on the minds of Heat fans. And this is the other thing that I just think they're not going to be able to escape this. If your third option, in terms of a player that's going to bail you out offensively when you can't get anything going and you got to get a shot and he's your shot creator. If after 2021, Kendrick Nunn is your third best guy at doing that, I think most Heat fans are going to be underwhelmed with what took place from a transactional perspective because they're expecting a better player come in to be able to provide that.
Mm-hmm. And look, Ethan, I knew that setting you up to be the devil's advocate on Kendrick Nunn was going to be good because I think it's good when we disagree, and I disagree there. But just because, and I'm really not – I know the biases with me and Duncan Robinson, me versus Kendrick Nunn. I know. I'm going to give Kendrick Nunn a lot of credit here. Like you said, the season averages all of a sudden look really, really good, right, for somebody of his role. Like he's averaging 14, 3 and 2 when you're just talking about points per game, assists per game, rebounds per game. His shooting splits are good. We obviously watch the team all the time. We know the context of the type of player he is. And I think in a vacuum, it is fair to say that Kendrick Nunn is a more skilled player than Duncan Robinson. I just don't buy the impact being similar yet, right? And I think, like Leif said, that he nailed the two different points here that I think are correct, which is about, what you also said was Duncan creates the spacing that makes it easier on everybody else, but also the consistency factor. Like Duncan just being so good at what he does in the lead and always impacting the game just because of that one thing he does so well, I think just makes such a difference. Now, Kendrick Nunn playing at this level, I can't say I look at him exactly the same as I did before. Like the bubble experience is really bad. It was magnified, like Leif said, and we're all just kind of down on him. I think he's absolutely a rotation player now, whereas before I was wondering if he was. And that's a big jump. I think he's been a starter level player because as I've stuck to this take for the past year and a half or so, I just think he looks a lot better next to those guys. And I haven't
next to Jimmy, next to Jimmy in particular. He's
for sure.
He doesn't play well without Jimmy.
Jimmy,
right.
Yeah, for sure. Jimmy has to be there. It has to be that level of playmaking. But when it's the rest of those starters, it's just so easy for him because we already know like those shots are going to be there for him, and he is a good shooter, and it makes it easier on him because he doesn't have to create. And that's where I disagree with you. I don't think he's comparable to Goran, really. I understand that he could do some stuff with the ball in his hands, but as a decision maker, even if he has been marginally better, I don't think it's been a significant enough difference. Like if I see Kendrick Nunn in a pick and roll, and look, he's been doing it decent enough where he just makes the basic reads, but I just don't want to see a lot of it. I understand now, they're missing Goran, they're missing Bradley, they're missing Tyler. You got to do what you got to do. But I still get nervous when Kendrick Nunn handles the ball. I don't know if that's unfair. I think, he can obviously drive to the cup a little bit when he sees an opening. I'm just not as high on him as I am with Duncan. Like I just think.
No, I get it, but I think that there's two different scenarios here. I think in a perfect
to be the guy that has to go. That's where I kind of land on it. Not that I think you have to trade him, but like if you're trying to upgrade the roster, especially the way he's playing, like I think he's somebody that a team.
Well, especially if they're going to do something with Avery Bradley. But let me just close because again, at some point he comes back and Dragic comes back, and then there's a squeeze in the backcourt when we're not talking about playing Gabe Vincent, who to me, other than competing defensively, really hasn't offered much, or Max Strus, who may not be ready for that kind of role. We saw last night, missed 8 shots. It was a little bit of an unfair situation. But to me, this is the way that I view the two of them. Duncan Robinson is the guy when you're talking about the Heat getting to their full offensive potential. Because when his gravity is working, we know what the numbers look like, okay? And, either he's making shots or he's making things really easy on Bam and Jimmy. So when the sets are being run to completion, when they're not being blown up, Duncan Robinson is the guy you want. But when your offense is a mess, as it's often been this year, and players in and out, and it's scattered, and it doesn't look clean, I'd rather have Kendrick Nunn on the court. Because to me, Kendrick Nunn can create something. I'm not saying he's a great shot creator, okay, but he can create something in that mid-range space and the other places on the floor that Duncan can't. And so when things are blown up.
What about this? I think Goran and Tyler are better at it than he is. All of those things you're mentioning.
Okay, but also,
I think Tyler is better in the mid-range, by the way. Like I think Tyler is pretty good there.
But purely by again, maybe this is unfair way to look at it, but purely by the numbers, Nunn's been better than both of them this year. He's also got a better turnover rate than Goran. Okay, although I know Goran handles it more often, but I'm talking about turnover rate. I mean, again, I'm playing devil's advocate here. Okay, I still think Duncan ultimately is having that kind of elite level shooter is harder to find than to find a guy who can score a little bit and sort of change the dynamic there. But I can't overlook it. Like you got a guard shooting 49%, close to 40% from 3.
Yeah. No, I mean, if all of a sudden Goran goes elsewhere this offseason and a couple other things break in different ways, he could end up being a super valuable bench scorer going forward. There's scenarios where that makes a ton of sense.
But Greg,
I don't think Heat fans have ever embraced him.
Can he be the bench scorer when you need him to play with Jimmy? That's the thing. It's like, you know what I mean? Because Alex, you've made that point. He's so much better in the starting lineup. So if you look at him ultimately as the Goran replacement, he's going to have to figure out a way to play without those starters, right? I mean, that's another issue to look at. So I don't think we settled the debate, but I think I'm outnumbered here. I think both of you are going for Duncan. Anyway, follow Tropical Blanket. Follow Greg Sylvander. We'll be back. We've got a special episode coming up on Tuesday. Bobby Marks, ESPN's cap guy, is going to join us Tuesday. He's going to take your questions through us. But definitely send them to me on Twitter. If you got any questions about what the Heat can do, can't do, bird rights, etc. Also, Bobby, can evaluate talent as well. He was in the Nets front office for a long time. So make sure you check that out. Bobby's he's joined us before, but we've got a lot for him. So he's going to join us on Tuesday, trying to answer some basic questions like Greg. I think that's when we get that Strus, game time, how much he can be on the active roster, how much he can play.
Exactly. We'll crack the Strus code.
We'll crack the Strus code and a whole bunch of other codes with Bobby on Tuesday night. But we'll also have post game on OKC, and also the streams will be going pregame and post game. Also check out 5reasonsports.com for all your Heat t-shirts.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network.